And in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Combat Ineffective. This is Combat Ineffective, the War Room, and this is my new podcast that I've been trying to start off. And if you guys have been listening to it, I appreciate that. I'm trying to figure out this new style and how I'm going to do this. Mainly because that GPU, if I could replace that, I could actually get my videos going up and get up and running again. But as I've told some of you, it's not going to be a cheap fix. That fix for that specific video card and for the setup that I've got, it's going to be around $400 to $1,000. And I mean, unless one of you is going to be a very gracious patron and provide me with one of those, I'm not going to ask for it. I'm going to try and save up my pennies out here and see if I can get it that way. But anyway, today I am going to talk to you, and I'm going to try to give you a little bit of Combat Ineffective news here. And I told you guys I was going to give you an episode that was dealing with the Falklands campaign, specifically the Falklands War of 1982, and why it was such a combat ineffective move for Argentina. Now, Argentina wasn't the only ones that had their own mistakes. The British made quite a few mistakes during the entire conflict, but the Argentinians were, without a doubt, hopeless in trying to win the campaign. Let's give you a background of what was actually going on with the Falklands. So, the Falkland Islands, or as they're known to Argentina, Isla Malvinas, are a set of islands that are they're distance off the coast of South America, pretty much in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and where they're located, they are about 8,000 miles away from the United Kingdom. So, Argentina had said for years before this, that they considered the Malvinas their islands. And this also included St. George Islands, which were not far away. In fact, the St. George Islands were also part of the Falklands campaign, and a little part that's very little talked about. There's actually another skirmish. There was another battle that took place over there that most people don't even know took place. It also involved the sinking, at least the destruction of an Argentinian submarine that was sent along with some commandos to take the island originally. So, when you look at where these islands are, they are very remote. I mean, the Falklands are an incredibly remote area in the South Atlantic. It's actually very close to Antarctica. There's really not much of a strategic value for it there, with the exception of maybe you can put some of your ships there, but with them being 8,000 miles away, that really stretches your logistics chain. There was only at the time something like 60 actual troops that were on the islands for Great Britain to defend them, and 10 of those were Royal Navy guys that just happened to be there because they were part of some expedition. I think they said that was going to and from Antarctica, and so they were part of the 60 or so troops that were there, with the rest of them being Royal Marines that were stationed there. So, Argentina had been trying to broker back and forth with the UK to try and get these islands, and every so often it seemed like they were making progress. Great Britain didn't really seem to have any need for the islands. There wasn't, like I said, there wasn't a strategic value to them. It was more of really a show of sovereignty, and that's really all it was. The breaking point, however, was the UK decided that they were going to allow the island citizens to determine where they wanted to be, whether they wanted to stay with the UK or whether they wanted to become citizens of Argentina. Argentina at this time was under a military dictatorship. Not the first one that they've had, mind you. And so most of the British that were on the islands, they had no reason to want to be part of Argentina. So overwhelmingly, they were in favor of staying citizens of Great Britain. And they didn't want to leave there either. They liked where they were at. That was their home. So on April 2nd, in 1982, the Argentinian military, and this was mainly their Marines, launched their invasion force. Now, what's strange about this is that the British actually knew about it. The governor of the islands was informed that there was intelligence that said that there was an invasion fleet that was heading their way and it would be arriving imminently. And this was April 1st. Talk about the ultimate April Fool's gag. Here comes Argentina and they're going to invade the Falkland Islands. Now, the reason Argentina decided to go on this campaign was, as I said, this was all about national sovereignty and let's put it this way, their government, the nationalist dictatorship that it was not doing well at home. They were dealing with very large unemployment, and so they needed to try and find a way to bolster their poll numbers and bolster their support at home. Otherwise, they were actually in very much dangerous territory of being overthrown, and they didn't want to do that. They wanted to stay where they were at. So the best way they thought to do that was, let's try with nationalism. Let's try with blaming somebody else for our problems, and let's say that the Falkland Islands, if we can get those back, we can puff out our chests, we can, pat ourselves on the back. We defeated this great empire, and now we have these islands that are ours, and they are back in our control. Yeah, pretty much any dictator in the world, that's going to be a red letter ticket to staying in power for another few years, at least until everybody realizes, wait, we still have all of these other domestic problems and we haven't fixed any of them. So they figured if they launch this invasion, it's 8,000 miles away. Are the British really going to want it? And this, if you would think about this, this is actually a realistic problem that they had to consider. The British, especially Margaret Thatcher's own administration, her reign as Prime Minister at the time, was not one that was going well. Great Britain was going through a bit of an economic depression, and so there was rampant unemployment at home. Her numbers were down as far as her popularity was concerned in Parliament. So when this was going on, they were also trying to lower their defense budget, and there were even talks that they were going to take their last 2 aircraft carriers that they had at the time, and they were going to do what's called mothball them, or even just sell them outright. They didn't think they needed them anymore. They were going to turn into what is essentially called a frigate navy. A frigate navy is a term for any navy out there that doesn't have any carriers, any flat tops. Because destroyers, cruisers, what have you, if you do not have aviation, they're all essentially about the same. They're just varying sizes of frigates, and they can be bigger or larger. I'm not talking that they're all the same class. Obviously, a frigate is an ocean-going vessel, and in most cases is no match for, say, a destroyer or a cruiser, but it can take on something like a corvette pretty easily. But essentially, they're all about the same at that point. And, it's just whether or not they have better armaments or whatever. So with all of that going on, Argentina figured they're probably not going to come after us. I mean, we could probably take these over, and if we don't just completely slaughter all of the defenders that are there, which, by the way, they had orders to cause as few casualties as possible. And in fact, they intentionally did not fire some of their more lethal stuff that they had to try and defeat the defenders that were there, which were hopefully outgunned. The British that were there, despite the fact that there was about 60 of them, and they did have some rockets, some 67 millimeter rockets and some 84 millimeter rockets with them. These were anti-tank rockets. They also had a few machine guns with them. They were no match for about 500 to 600 Argentine Marines and commandos that came ashore with armored vehicles ready to go to war. So when they come ashore, and very quickly the British, they knew they were done. It did not take long. It was a very small token resistance. They gave up, and Argentina thought, all right, we've got our win, we have the islands, we're set. Mistake number one. They did not expect the response they were going to get. Argentina was by far not ready for this fight. They did not have, first off, they weren't going to have air superiority out there. They were going to have some resistance out there, but they did not have better aircraft than the British. Their first mistake was thinking that the carriers were going to be either scrapped or sold or whatever. That didn't happen. The British very quickly sent 2 aircraft carriers down with the, at the time, brand new Sea Harriers. And these were probably some of the better air-to-air fighters that were around in the world, especially for fleet defense. And going up against A4 Skyhawks and some of the other aircraft that they had A4 Skyhawks, Mirage 3s, Mirage 2000s. These were all much older aircraft that just were no match for a modern Air Force coming in with modern weaponry. And that started off the problem right there. The fact that you won't be able to have air superiority in this, and you're going to need it. That was part of mistake number one. Not thinking that they were going to even need a fight. And 2, the carriers are going to be coming, and they're coming with a better aircraft and a lot more of them. In fact, if you actually look at the numbers, the Harriers actually performed very well against the Argentine Air Force through most of the campaign. The only thing that did better than them in terms of numbers was the air defense weaponry that they had on some of the ships. But if you look at the Royal Navy, on the damage to the ships took a lot more of a pounding than anything else. The Sea Harriers, I don't think they hardly lost any planes on that. Matter of fact, I'm going to look that up while I'm talking to you all, because the Harrier did extremely well in the Falklands campaign. And that was helped even more by Operation Black Buck. What's Operation Black Buck? Well, that was a set of Air Force raids by the Royal Air Force that involved their Vulcan bombers along with their Victor tankers, which were they were old bombers that were converted into tankers. They flew a set of 2 of them down to Ascension Island, which is only about 4,000 miles away from the Falkland Islands, and about 4,000 miles away from the UK. So it's pretty much about halfway. Their main mission at the start was to launch an airstrike against the actual runways that were on the Falkland Islands, specifically around Fort Stanley. This was one of the main runways that was there. It was one of the main points where they could actually launch aviation, and especially with some of the stuff that they had, the Argentines, this would be very critical to them. The A4 Skyhawks specifically did not have that long of a range, and especially coming from the mainland, that meant they would have very little time over target before they would have to turn around and come back. And some of these guys, during the fighting, it was almost suicidal with them coming in, and some of them it was suicidal to try and at least attack the Royal Navy that was sitting down below them. A4 Skyhawks are very good aircraft, and honestly, to be completely honest with you, they're probably one of the more underrated aircraft in the world as far as how simple the design is, but they were incredible with as fast as they were and as nimble as they were. You could look this up with the Navy's Top Gun program. They used the A4 Skyhawk for years against F4 Phantoms, F-14s, and I think they even used them against some of the F-18s. And what they found out was the pilots that were in them, which these were instructor pilots, they're some of the best pilots in the world, they had to tone down what they could do in these so that it gave the F-14s and pretty much anyone that was going to Top Gun a fighting chance against them. So the A4 was one heck of a good plane. But with them not having that long of a range, if they had to fly from mainland Argentina, they needed a base nearby. So they launched these Vulcans in the dead of night on Black Buck 1. And almost immediately they ran into a problem. The lead aircraft that was supposed to be the one to actually do the bombing run, they had a backup, but this first one had to turn back because it could not get a complete seal for the air in the plane. And they found out one of the windows couldn't seal up front. So it had to turn back. The reason for this was they needed pretty much all the fuel they could get to get there. They had something like 14 Victor tankers to get down there and only a couple of them to bring them back. The way this mission was going to work is they had to fly off, topped off with fuel, and as they started flying, the Victors would start fueling each other up to extend their range. So it would start off with 14, then it went to 7 because the first 7 fueled up the ones behind them. Now, as they fueled up, one of them was going to be fueling up the Vulcan each time. So then they had to do another fueling. It went from 7 to 3. So they fueled those up. Then it goes from 3 to 1. And they had to fuel that one up. And then go in for their run. And then hope that there was another aircraft on the way back that could fuel them when they start turning around. So not an easy mission. And not only that, the bombs that they were using, I believe they were using radar guidance. This was not laser guided in any way. This was just a straight up, almost like a World War II air raid, to be honest. They come descending out of the clouds, see where the runway is, drop their bombs, with hardly even a shot fired at them. They said I forget what they called it, the specific air defense that was there. I think it's called the Sea King. Locked on to them only briefly, and then they got out of there and kept flying. Not Sea King, the Skyguard system. They flew out. One bomb hit the runway. I mean, it was easy to be repaired, but the fact that the British could fly that far and take it out that quickly and that easily led the Argentinians to pretty much not use Port Stanley for most of the war. And that actually limited them during the entire campaign. So now that that's out, the British were coming in with almost uncontested air superiority. Argentina did have an aircraft carrier, and I think it's called the 5th of May. I think it actually is called the Cinco de Mayo. It was sailing to the north of the Falkland Islands. To the south of the Falkland Islands, near the 250-mile exclusion zone that the British had said anything that comes within it will be attacked, there steamed the ARA General Belgrano. Now this was the biggest ship that they've had, the biggest surface ship that wasn't their carrier. It was previously a U.S. cruiser. Was sailing with 2 destroyers for escort, very close to the actual exclusion zone. As the British fleet came in, there were orders that were coming up, and this is not even... Argentina will say to this day, and a lot of their nationalists will say to this day, that the sinking of the Belgrano was one of the greatest tragedies of the war, but even the captain of that ship acknowledges that he did have orders that the Northern Fleet with the carrier, along with his fleet, was going to create a pincer movement, and they were going to go after the British fleet to try and sink both of their carriers. So, as they steamed closer and closer to the exclusion zone, Margaret Thatcher knew that HMS Conqueror was the British nuclear submarine was sitting nearby. They knew that they had a chance to take it, and she gave the order to sink her. 3 torpedoes go into the water. Boom, boom, boom. Down goes the Belgrano. Their 2 destroyers didn't even know it happened until later. And by that point, they were not sticking around to try and find out whether that submarine was still sitting there and if they were going to be sitting ducks. That was another mistake. Why are you having 2 destroyers out there? And apparently they must not have been steaming at full battle stations, because even the Belgrano wasn't. Their watertight doors weren't closed. Sounds like the destroyers weren't even looking for a submarine. They were probably thinking, we're outside of the exclusion zone. We don't have to really worry about it too much. We'll wait till we get in. Huge mistake, especially if you don't know there's a submarine sitting right there ready to pounce. This action scared the Argentinian Navy so much that their Northern Fleet with their carrier turned away and started heading for home. And as they were heading for home, 2 other British submarines that were tailing that fleet kept trying to get shots off at the carrier. So very quickly, Argentina was left with no Navy presence in the waters outside of the Falkland Islands. That left the British with their entire fleet, including destroyers, frigates, a couple carriers, pretty much their whole fleet sitting right there, ready to go to war. And now Argentina is left with their defense force that's sitting on the islands, which was around 5,000 troops at this point, to deal with the entirety of the British force that was coming to liberate the Falkland Islands. Now, Argentina at this point was pretty much done for. I mean, I'm actually looking at what they brought to the party, and yes, I'm bouncing around, but I mean, what other podcast doesn't bounce around, especially when you're trying to come up with about 30 to 40 minutes worth of talk time? Looking at the stuff that they brought to the party, and where is it at? If you're wondering where I'm getting this information, all over the place. The fact that the British thought that they could just come in with an entire flotilla and take it over quickly was one of their mistakes. And where that started was they brought across a cargo vessel, and I believe it was called the Atlantic. Yeah, it was called the Atlantic Conveyor, I think. I'm trying to find it. Was sunk by the Exocet missiles. Before the war started, Argentina had started buying the French-built Super Étendard attack aircraft. It's actually not a bad aircraft, but this is pretty much their claim to fame. The Super Étendards using Exocet missiles, both here at the Falkland Islands, and I believe in the Iran-Iraq War, they were also used to good effect. They're very good at coming in on low level, and they are extremely effective with the Exocet missile. The Exocet was probably one of the best anti-ship cruise missiles in the world at that point, and in fact, it was one of the more feared ones. It's a very low sea-skimming missile, and with how quick it started just taking out ships during the Falklands campaign, especially HMS Sheffield. Sheffield had no chance. The Sheffield was pretty much sitting there as a sitting duck. They were aiming for the carrier and missed, to be honest. The Sheffield just was in the way. But, and I know I'm bouncing around, the Atlantic Conveyor was one of the cargo vessels that was coming in. This one had helicopters, runway building equipment, and tents. This thing was going to be pretty much their logistics. As soon as they got to the Falkland Islands, they were going to get there, they were going to get these helicopters off, and the helicopters were going to be able to take the RAF, the Royal Marines, right across the islands. They were going to be able to take Port Stanley and not really have to do a fight. They could just bounce around with the helicopters, launch air assault, or just, air operations with the helicopters and keep going. Instead, now they had to slog it out with actually a ground campaign, which I know a lot of you are probably thinking, well, it's the islands. These islands probably aren't going to be that hard to defend. Well, islands, especially in the South Atlantic and stuff, they're very hilly. You've got the topography of these things is just nothing but, hills and valleys. And some of these, especially like Goose Green, you've got a huge amount of terrain to cover. The Argentinians thought that they could easily defend against the British, at least during the daytime. Both sides were actually using the same gun, the same battle rifle they were using. In fact, most of the stuff was actually interoperable between the two. The British were using the FN-FAL, and so was the Argentinians. The only difference between the two rifles was that the Argentinian version was a full auto version, and the British one, I believe, was a single-shot burst fire. So that was the only real difference. And in fact, after some of the battles, there were many reports of British soldiers picking up the Argentinian rifles so that they had the full auto versions. Same weapon, fires the same round. All right, we can use it, and it just fires faster. That's all. But at this point, there was no chance that the Argentinians were going to win this battle. That they were going to win the war. There was no chance. As soon as British troops landed, they were done. When you're dealing with a top-rate military, especially one like the British, they're going to come and they're going to defeat you. They have more resources, and they were bringing some of the best technology that they could afford with them. This is one of the first uses of night vision devices in modern combat. I mean, in the Vietnam War, we were using something called starlight scopes, which were very primitive, but early versions of night vision. They were just image intensifiers. They're not that good. They're good for being able to see at night, but you can't really pinpoint target things that well with them. You just can see very well. The British decided that they were going to fight most of their battles at night against a force that did not have any night vision capability really to fight against them. And on top of that, the Argentine enlisted that were set to fight were not in any condition to fight a war. They had ammo, but they didn't have food. There are reports that some of them were just before the Battle of Goose Green, that they were drinking hot water soup, basically, with maybe a bouillon cube for them, just to keep their calories up while they were sitting out in the cold at night. And their officers really were kind of just living it up in Port Stanley. There's reports that they were having, parties and stuff, sitting around in some of the houses. And there's even a report that one of the enlisted soldiers was caught trying to steal food, and he was punished extremely for the infraction. Well, I mean, if you don't have food out there, you're going to try and find a way to get it. And I don't blame the soldier for that. But the fact that they're not taking care of their soldiers shows that they really weren't ready for a fight. If you're going to have your logistics in line for it, then maybe you have a fighting chance. But if you can't even bring food out there, what are you going to do against a well-fed and a well-maintained British force that's coming up against you? You really don't have a shot. So with everything that was going on, with the fact that Argentina thought first that they could just walk in without really even firing a shot at the British, and that the British were just going to let them have it, that was mistake number one. Mistake number two was them thinking that the British might not even be able to take back the islands, especially if they don't have their carriers anymore. They had their carriers, they brought them. Mistake three, not thinking that the British would be able to retake the islands or even have air superiority over it when the war started, and not even making sure that your troops had proper food and equipment for a fight against one of the top countries in the world, one that has made a name for itself at taking territories, over the past couple hundred years. So, when it comes to this, in summation of this whole thing, and I know I'm rambling on, this was a doomed to failure mission for Argentina. And I know there's going to be plenty of people saying Argentina should have been able to win this. This was a fool's errand. And anyone that thinks otherwise, you can look at the stuff, you can look at all the information that I have, all of the stuff that's out there, and it shows the exact same thing. There is no reason Argentina should have fought this. They shouldn't even be mad about the General Belgrano sinking. The captain even admitted that they were going on an attack mission. Yeah, they were outside of the exclusion zone, but if you know that somebody's coming after you, you're going to take them out before they get there. They may try to say as much as they want that it's cowardly. It's war. What are you expecting? And it's not like they went after a cargo vessel. They didn't. And when it comes to the humanitarian side of this, both sides had set up areas where hospital ships and prisoner exchanges and wounded exchanges would take place. So they actually had things in place for wounded soldiers on both sides. So in terms of the humanitarian part of this, both sides actually did well. In terms of the combat, Argentina was just doomed from the start for this. So for all of that and everything that's going on, this is Combat Ineffective's take on the Falklands War of 1982. We hope that you'll actually follow this channel as we start to try and build this up, as I try to get my style going on this. I thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to follow us further, be sure to find us on YouTube. You can follow us also on Anchor, Spotify. There's like 6 different places that this podcast is up. Be sure to follow it, share it with your friends, and if you have any comments, just find us. We also have our website, www.combatineffective.com is out there. It has some of our old videos, as does our YouTube. So we've got a wide array of ways that you can contact us. If you like this podcast and wish to support it, be sure to check out our Patreon, which you can also find the link for that at our website. And we would like to thank our general level sponsors, both General Richie and General Sergio Suarez, for their continued support. We'd like to thank all of our other Patreon supporters that are out there. We thank you for staying with us during our hiatus, and now that we're back, we hope that you'll follow us for the next episode of Combat Ineffective War Room.